All right, welcome to this session. And just for those of you watching who don't know who we are, this is TRIG, the Technology Research Interdisciplinary Group, and we're a group of people who are interested in exploring topics loosely related to human augmentation and anything beyond. None of us are specific experts, and today, since we're all busy people, some of us, such as myself, have only read a portion of the paper, but nevertheless, that's what we use to sort of like guide our discussion, and we'll have a brainstorm session at the end. And I think the flow that we're going to do that we discussed just right now is we'll start off with Erika, who will share a very cool app that she developed along the topic of synesthesia. And then from Erika, we will go to Shahryar and Punya, who will sort of talk about the relationship between synesthesia and sensory substitution. No, wait, sorry, I screwed it up already. Okay, from Erika, then we'll go to Yara, who will talk about, synesthesia and blind people. And then from there, we'll go to Shahryar and Punya, we'll talk about sensory substitution and synesthesia. And then we'll go to me, we'll talk about training and synesthesia, like training people who don't have synesthesia to have it. Okay, Erika, take it away. Let's check this out.
All right, let me share my screen. Okay, can you guys see this?
See it, yeah.
All right, cool. So last week, Punya mentioned it would be cool to have like an app that let you associate colors and sounds. And so what this does is it just you click anywhere and it plays a sound, and you click a color to say, oh, I associate this color with this sound, and then so I've been playing around with this for a while. So I actually did not develop synesthesia, but oh, I got that one wrong. I developed my own little way of memorizing what the notes should be around the circle. Now I'm getting them all wrong. But anyway, what you can see is it shows you what colors you picked previously. And the goal is, and it's sort of like game-ish, but it doesn't exactly have scoring. It just tells you whether you pick the same color or not. So the goal is to pick the same color all the time. And say if I picked that, then I'd have like a inconsistency for the note A. And what I found was I could do the major C scale. I started off with chromatic scale and I couldn't do it at all. And I'm okay at the major C scale, although I mess up F and G a lot. And I'm definitely not doing it directly through synesthesia. I've got like a scheme for deciding what note is which based on like the relative tones. So I as a synesthesia thing, it may be a failure so far, that there might be ways to improve it. I'm not sure. Any questions or anything?
Well, first of all, I think this is really cool, and also I'll just quickly say one or two words because there's a little lag between what you're showing and what we're seeing. But this is very quickly for anyone watching who may not know. So synesthesia is this sort of, I think we had defined it before, and I'm going to do a poor job defining it now. But it's usually when you've got two different like sensory experiences that are paired together that typically are not. So in this example, you hear a note. And there are people out there in the world that when they hear a particular note, they actually see a color. And they'll often, whenever they hear that specific note, they'll see the same color every single time. And some musicians have this ability, so it's something really kind of cool. And so what Erika is showing here is that when you hear a note, you now can pick the color that you think is associated with that note. This could be used as a diagnostic tool to sort of see, does a person have synesthesia? Because those who have synesthesia will be able to, every time when they hear a note, pick the same exact color. But then the other thing sort of Erika was talking about, which I'll talk about at the end, is can you use this to train people who don't have synesthesia to maybe experience it? And what's the difference between synesthesia and just building a scheme or like some sort of cognitive strategy to reach it? So these would be topics that maybe we'll discuss. Yeah, any other things people want to say before we move on?
I just had one question
Go
to
ahead,
ask.
go ahead.
Sorry.
Go
I
ahead, go ahead.
if you change the order of the colors in the circle so that you're not really basing it off of like geographic positioning, I think that might make us even worse at it, I guess. So even if like, you know, you think that let's just try go in a circle. So like A is up here and like at 12 o'clock and then C is at 3 o'clock. I think that might also be another way to.
Yeah, that was definitely on my list of like maybe try that things. Yeah.
Wow, that's a great point.
Yeah, and kind of, I thought it was interesting how Erika was saying how she kind of like cheated the system. And I'm wondering like how that could, how you have to consider that when, I know Vivek, you're going to talk about like how you can train synesthesia. So I'm wondering how like in, you know, let's say when you're running an experiment, how can you prove that someone is really experiencing synesthesia versus just like cheating the system and like learning it a different way. And I think that's like an interesting thing to consider when, you know, you're considering like potential errors in the study and like things that, you know, you need to take account of is like potential, like, you know, how can you maybe learn the associations a different way other than through like true synesthesia.
It's a really deep point, and I'm already starting the flow chart, and I'll bring it up at the end. But like it also touches on like what's the difference between association and synesthesia? Is there not? That's a great point, Ethan. All right. Well, awesome. Thank you, Erika. We're gonna bring this back in the brainstorming session when we get to it then. Okay, cool, Yara.
All right. Hi, everyone. Let me share my screen. Let me see. Okay. Can everyone see the PDF?
I see. Currently, I see a blank, like a black screen, and it says you're screen sharing. So we are.
I think we're just seeing your Chrome window because we can see like all the tabs and stuff.
I think I shared your own thing. Sorry. Let me see. Let me try again. Entire screen. There we go. I think this will work. How about now?
Oh, yes.
Okay, let's go. So this is I'll try and give a brief summary of visual synesthesia in the blind, you know, based on this article, which is from 2003. So synesthesia is defined as idiosyncratic ectopic sensations, which commonly take place in the form of colored visual impressions evoked by touch or pain. So like Vivek had defined it earlier, basically you stimulate one sensation or, you know, sensory, one sense, and then you get like another sense that's stimulated in conjunction with that. So this study includes 6 people or 6 individuals who are late blind individuals, and 4 of them had been without color vision for more than 10 years. And then this is just the conclusion, which I'll get to later. So the condition is thought to be heritable, which as of 1996, it was as prevalent as 1 in 2,000 people. Once again, defined as certain sensory stimuli, or once again, like it's a phenomenon where certain sensory stimuli elicit illusory perceptual experiences in the same or another modality, usually like auditory or touch, or sorry, tactile or any other sense, basically. And the most common types of synesthesia involve ectopic visual. Yeah, most common types of synesthesia involve ectopic visual sensations, usually of color. So, you know, color or some modality will trigger some sort of color. So with imaging such as functional MRI and PET scans, it was found that not so much primary visual cortex was being stimulated, sorry, not the primary visual cortex, however, association areas of the cortex, so visual association cortex, and then the striate cortex, which is also part of the visual cortex, just not a primary area. And so this paper examines the question of what happens to visual synesthetic percepts if a person becomes blind. So for a bit of background, in blind people without synesthesia, it was found that they, association areas of the visual cortex were activated in pattern recognition tasks as well as auditory localization tasks. And so it's thought that, well, actually, another interesting finding was that people who are blind at early stages can localize sounds better than people who are actually sighted. And so this indicates a possibility of, sorry, I guess I forgot to highlight it, but essentially it's not necessary, or sorry, it's thought that stimulation of some other modality, oh, there it is, seems that when a person becomes blind, the visual cortex can be taken over by other sensory modalities. And so to try and explain it, I would say it's other stimuli sort of interfere with whatever you would perceive in visual areas. Hopefully that makes sense. And so basically, sorry, I feel like this is a little too long. Let me see. I'm gonna skip that actually. So for this study specifically, there were 6 cases, and so one of them, patient JF, stated that he sees colors when he touches or thinks about Braille letters, numbers, musical notes, and he also experiences colored hearing for time-related words like days of the week, months of the year. Another case that I found interesting was patient DM, who was has been at that point completely blind, had been at that point blind for 14 years. And so she experienced synesthesia in the form of colored hearing for time-related words, as well as individual letters. So she'll look at the letter R, for example, and think of red. And so these are just some other patients or individuals, sorry, were part of the study. So the categorization of the types of synesthesia in late blind subjects was divided into 3 main parts. The first one was colored Braille synesthesia, where if an individual touches Braille, like the tactile sensation of Braille, evokes that synesthetic perception. And they see it kind of like an LED display of dots that are colored corresponding to that letter, colored corresponding to that color. They look like that color, they look like the letter, the Braille letter, and they're colored like an LED display. The second form was colored hearing synesthesia for letters, numbers, and words, including time-related words. And so in this form, just hearing or saying a specific day, a specific letter, like month, etc., evoked a certain color sensation. And so moving forward, some other influences on that perception include the volume of the voice used to say those words, like either to yourself or to the subject, as well as mood, surprisingly had an effect. Based on mood, the saturation of the color would fluctuate. And let me see. So essentially, when compared, just to, I guess, measure how consistent the reports were to sort of confirm that it was in fact synesthesia and not, some other interference causing those results or perceptions. The consistency for people with synesthesia who, or I guess the subjects in this study, was measured 2 months apart, and the consistency was at 96.6%. However, for control subjects who did not have synesthesia, consistency, despite it being, the dates were closer. It was, I did not highlight it. Let me see. Okay, I'm not sure how long it was. Oh, it was a week later. The consistency was only 18.8%. And I'm not sure, to be honest, what the measurement, or I guess standard that they used was to gauge, consistency or sort of measure that perception was. However, that's the percentage that I was able to find. And another interesting point would be that those phantoms or the perceptions did not move with the subject's eyes, as opposed to direct stimulation of the visual cortex, the primary visual cortex, led to, like, if it were simulated in a different area, that appearance of color would move. However, in this specific study for people with synesthesia, it did not, per their description, as mentioned. And yeah, to wrap up, it seems that the neural connectivity underlying specific synesthesia. So actually, it seems that it's something that's sort of lifelong, where in cases of complete blindness, you maintain sort of most of the stimulation perception relation. However, when it comes to the case of Braille, it seems that connectivity is acquired after being blind, when the connections have already formed, and that would be categorized as experience dependent learning. And yeah, that is it. Sorry, it was kind of rushed all over the place, but granted, this was my first time. I'll do better next time.
Oh no, this was very good. So this was Yara's first presentation. So congratulations, and yeah, it was very clear. It was very good. I mean, this isn't like a class. We were all doing like full-time work, so that this is really good. So yeah, actually, Yara, if you can stop screen sharing, and then we can. No, it's cool.
I also
but,
was timing myself, so sorry if that was a little long.
No, Yara, just extremely well done, and it was a great paper. Like, it was not one that I would have thought of looking at, but at the moment I saw the topic, I was like, whoa, this is like wicked cool. Like, do people who are blind actually see colors from other? It's a really cool topic. So nice. Any thoughts, questions, any comments before we move on?
Who is the author? Let me check. The authors, actually, I'll just copy and paste them in the chat.
Oh yeah, no, I was asking other people if they have questions. Shahryar, you had unmuted.
Yeah, I think because you mentioned that for the people who got trained who weren't blind, like their accuracy dropped over time, and then for blind people, it's like kind of permanent. I'm wondering if that's just because they practiced the skill more, because you mentioned this was like 1 week, and so like if you just had those people who weren't blind, if you just for the rest of their lives kept testing them, kept having them, I wonder if we can just say this is more of a training thing than a synesthetic thing, or like, you know what I mean? I'm not sure if I'm explaining that right, but
no, I think so, but I think I might have misexplained, because the control subjects were actually people who are blind but did not have synesthesia. And so they ran the same study on them and had them describe the letter with some sort of measurement standard. And when they tested them a week apart, there was like 18% consistency, as opposed to like 96% consistency with the people who did have synesthesia. So, but all the subjects were blind.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
Nice. Oh, good. That's a thorough reading. And yeah, that was a very good question. Yeah.
Oh yeah, thanks, Shahryar. Good question.
It's pretty mind-blowing, and it's cool that they got a little bit of imaging in there too, and like to have lost sight and yet still see these like ghosts of colors is kind of surreal.
And to develop new ways of seeing it, like with Braille, that was mind-blowing.
Yeah. Okay, anyone else? Okay. So yeah, we'll do a more thorough brainstorm session at the end. Okay, so I guess next are Shahryar and Punya, since you guys both did the same paper, and yeah, it's really good.
Sure. Punya, how do you want to do this? Do you want to?
You can just go through, and then I can add whatever.
Sure. Okay. Sorry, wrong thing. Let's see. Can everyone see this now?
Yeah.
Okay. So, I mean, the paper we're talking about right now is mixing up the senses. Sensory substitution is not a form of artificially induced synesthesia. So this was something we were discussing last week, and I think it's kind of relevant for, the idea that what we want to do is build a device, right? So I think going over a topic like this can kind of help us focus the sort of design path that we want to go. It might be that we actually do want to do sensory substitution, and delineating that, early on, I think can be helpful in just sort of keeping a project focused in terms of goals. So basically, what they describe here in the abstract is that sensory substitution devices are typically used to restore functionality of a sensory modality that has been lost, like visual for the blind, by recruiting other sense modalities such as touch or audition, which I think they mean audio. So for example, in the case of blind people using Braille for reading, or like auditory guides when you're going on like a tour in a museum and so on. Those would be kind of like, I guess, sensory substitution devices that are basically there to make up for the lack of a sense. And then this section basically just goes over a lot of different sensory substitution devices, which I'm not going to talk about. But basically, once we get to here, we get an idea of what the artificial synesthesia view is of sensory substitution. So the idea here is that, in synesthesia, as I think Yara mentioned, usually, people are born with the ability of having one type of stimulus sort of igniting, either a different sense in the same modality of sensory information or in like another. So for example, when you hear a note, you might see a color, or when you see certain letters, that might also invoke a color as well. So you can have, visual to visual or visual to audio and so on. And so the idea is that, well, in this case, when you're doing a sensory substitution device, what you're essentially doing kind of sounds like synesthesia, right? Where you have, the sensation of touch, and you're trying to evoke a similar experience to sight. And so that's kind of like the idea that they're kind of trying to explore here is, can we really make that that claim? And then, so the main view, synesthesia view of sensory substitution, there's kind of like 2 points that they say sensory substitution would have to fit in order for it to be considered like a form of artificial synesthesia. One is experience with SSDs is akin to the substituted information. So that I'm not totally sure what they mean by that. I've tried reading a bit, but my understanding, at least, is that what they're trying to say is that it should invoke the same sort of feeling or sensation as if you had experienced the like information. So the idea that like if the thing we're trying to replace is reading, you should get the same sort of experience of reading through Braille as you do through, visually seeing the letters.
And just to add on to that a little bit, so the voice and one of our, so the first iteration of this, we had gone into sensory substitution and had shown a YouTube video with the voice, and I'll just really quickly describe it because it's kind of interesting. So this is for blind people who cannot see, but they're using auditory information to be able to like almost see. And the way it works is that you have like the device is like a camera, and it's scanning from one side to the other, and it's converting whatever it sees into like a bunch of frequencies. So for example, if you have something up here, you might sound like this. So like I'm not doing a good job, you have to watch the YouTube video, but basically you have a bunch of frequencies, they're kind of abstract, but as it goes from right to left, if like let's say something's high up, maybe it's you start to hear high frequencies. And with enough practice, people get this phenomenological, and what that essentially means is this experience that it, I guess, almost feels like vision. Like with enough time, what some people, very few, but some people say is that, oh, you know what, it's almost like to a certain extent kind of seeing. The other example, I'll do really quickly, but since it relates to this, is like, back in the day, Bakirita, had this movie camera and he connected it to this 12 by 12 grid that shock your tongue. And again, like if there was an X shape on the wall or something, and the blind person points the camera there, then you would get an X-shaped shock on your tongue. And with enough practice, people were able to detect and see like tubes and cups and stuff like that, which is pretty cool. I mean, and the claim was that people were even able to catch a ball using, this technology. And some people who were blind were like, oh, this almost feels like vision. I mean, it was just 12 by 12. You didn't have high resolution, but it almost felt like vision. So what a lot of their claim was that, look, you don't see with your eyes, you see with your brain. And so if you can somehow activate that through new neural connections to a different part of your body that's getting similar sensory information, you can then substitute your missing vision with another sense. So that was sort of like a long version of what we had done in the first iteration of this. So thank you. Yeah.
Yeah,
sorry to
no,
interrupt.
that's really cool. And I think all of those examples really relate a lot to the second point for what they describe here, which is that both the substituted and substituting information are consciously perceived simultaneously. So I think this also kind of relates to what Erika described before when you had your app up, and kind of like how she mentioned that what she was doing was not really like, feeling the sound and the colors, but more just she had like a rubric in her head, right? And so it was like, it wasn't that she was consciously perceiving both, but like almost like an algorithm in her head was taking her from one point to the next. And so this is kind of, at least from what I read, the point where it, the connection between synesthesia and sensory substitution kind of breaks down, because when you're doing sensory substitution, what you're essentially doing is you're really only trying to get the information from the sense that's lost, right? So we care about, bringing back in visual information, whereas with synesthesia, both of the senses are supposed to be activated simultaneously, and both should be consciously perceivable. So the person should be able to tell, like, you talked about the thing on the tongue, right? It's like I can feel it on my tongue, and I can basically have an image in my mind of like a ball, which kind of seemed like what was happening, but I imagine that's something that requires a lot of training, and there's probably nuances there that I'm not too sure about. But basically, that's one of the important things that they go through, and I'm just going to quickly go through what I think is. Let me just control F, because it was a pretty good part. Yeah, it was here when they're talking about the automacy of the process. What they're talking about is that the idea is that, when we're talking about synesthesia and sort of igniting these very similar, these two experiences, when you train someone enough, what's happening is that instead of like, seeing, having the sensory substitution, rather than sort of consciously perceiving the information that is substituting, whatever experience you have, their brain kind of immediately jumps to the information that's important, what's called like the inducer. And so that's kind of like that. This is where I think the connection between synesthesia and sensory substitution kind of breaks down, because what happens is when you're training someone to complete a task and do that, your brain kind of takes whatever shortcut it does and just sort of subconsciously, once it receives that signal from the substitution device, immediately evokes whatever it's supposed to perceive, and not necessarily consciously remembers that, like, for example, it's getting shocked on the tongue, right? And so that's something that they mention is it's not very well documented, but the idea is that that's what eventually happens once you train someone very strongly with any of these connections with the sensory substitution device. They're no longer experiencing both things simultaneously. It's like one experience just subconsciously triggers whatever thing you want to happen, and so they act in the way you would expect with the actual information that you expect. That's kind of, like catching the ball. They might not even think that their tongue is being shocked. They just know that the ball is there, right? That's the idea behind sensory substitution and training it. And so that's one thing. And then and so that's kind of important. Then the other thing that they talk about is inducer concurrent pairing. So when they talk about inducer and concurrent, inducer is kind of like the information that you want them to perceive, and concurrent is the secondary information when it comes to sensory substitution. So again, that would be the visual image of a ball versus would be the inducer, and then the concurrent information would be the shock on the tongue, for example. And so the idea is that, kind of, I think we talked about this for synesthesia in the past, how the strong relation between these two things means that, every time you hear that an A note, you will see the same color over and over. That kind of also relates to consistency. These two things are very close together. And so the idea is that, pairing this inducer and concurrent pairing and making sure that it's consistent over time is important for both techniques. And so that's like that's where they overlap. I haven't gone through the paper in enough detail to say where the two differ in this case. It's a little bit more difficult. And then the last thing is relative idiosyncrasy. So this is what I would say a bit more of a gray area, because the idea is in synesthesia, almost everything is idiosyncratic in the sense that one person's experience of synesthesia, even if they're twins and have the same type of synesthesia, will still be very different. So you could have one twin perceiving like a shade of brown for a note, and another one might perceive a shade of green, like even though they have the same genetics and stuff, and so on. And on the other hand, when you're doing sensory substitution, what you're doing is you're really trying to teach people to perceive the same input information, and you're giving them the same substituted signal, for all the people you're training. And there's some minor evidence that seems to say that there's like a bit of synchronicity. So some people build the mental images of whatever sense you're trying to substitute in slightly different ways, but it's not as clear how that it's not as clear how those idiosyncrasies sort of come forth. It's hard to measure from what I can tell. And it's pretty not very well reported. So like, I think they mentioned that there's only like one report of that idiosyncrasy even coming up. And yeah, I'd say that's about everything that I can tell. And so, yeah, at least my takeaway from the paper is really the big thing is that the sort of conscious experience of maintaining that of like both senses in synesthesia versus like just replacing one and going immediately to like what you want to use seems to be. So, I just kind of relating this to a design perspective, I wonder if that's something we may want to talk about, because I remember we talked about like, one of the training, one of the artificial like synesthesia training papers that we discussed in the past, where people would see letters and numbers, and then they would sort of like in their minds have like it glazed over of a certain color, and they went out into their regular lives and had that, right? And so I wonder, that's something we want to keep in mind, I guess, when we're designing, if we want to have it so that people who use the device will always have both conscious experience to both, conscious access to both experiences like simultaneously, or if actually it makes more sense to just focus on, training for one. Yeah.
That is wicked cool. I mean, I had no idea what the differences were like last time we talked, and I think that really clarified it. Punya, was there anything you wanted to add, or is that like a good
No, that that was very good. I think the consistency aspect is like one of the main things for me, that the fact that you have to be like, even if you are training, like you have to be consistent. And then again, like analyzing the way studies look at, like Ethan was mentioning, like how you actually quantify what synesthesia is, or somebody's just making a different like visual or graphical representation rather than like associating a sound to whatever. And then I think just like the end of the study, or like the end of the paper, was basically like more research needs to be done. And then I think in order for more research to be done, it's important to see like actually quantify and characterize, or like properly define how we should assess like the sensory substitution and like the success and failure or of like synesthesia trials as well.
Yeah, I appreciate those comments, and it's just, yeah, I don't know, I'm still like pretty fascinated at sort of like this idea of substitution versus like simultaneous experience. And it was something like a perspective that I had not thought of, but now that you've mentioned it, it's sort of like everything fits together and kind of makes sense. Let's see, any other comments? Okay, so we've got like 14-ish minutes. Maybe I'll quickly do my thing, and then we'll do some brainstorming. Maybe we'll go just 5 or 6 minutes, not more, over just so we can get a little bit of brainstorming and thoughts for next time. Okay, so let me share screen, and I think it does sort of fit in with many of the things that we've been talking about. My screen, okay, here we go. All right. So the paper that I did not read, but like just really quickly look through, is this: coordinated neural, behavioral, and phenomenological changes in perceptual plasticity through overtraining of synesthetic association. So I'll sort of read like their conclusions, and then I'll focus on the training. And really, what I was curious about was really the training paradigm, because in some of these cases, they're taking people who don't have any synesthesia at all, and that we reviewed this paper maybe in the last video, and this is a different one. And all of a sudden, these people, some of them, many of them, are reporting actual perceptual experiences where they go out into the world and they look at a letter, and sure enough, now they're seeing color. And that is wild. And part of what really attracted me to sensory substitution back in the day, before we even went into synesthesia, was, you know, with that, as I was describing, the brain port, that camera that then has a tongue shocker, just the fact that some people felt like they completely merged. And now all of a sudden, people who were blind again for like 10, 20 years are feeling like something similar to vision is there. And not only that, in some studies, they actually showed portions of their brain were activating that are related to the visual area, even though that they're blind. So I mean, it was that sort of human experience was like mind blowing to me. I was like, whoa, like, wow. So in any case, the question then became, like, how do you do that? And this also goes to the core of this idea of human augmentation, my research with these vibrotactors. Maybe in one of the future meetings, I'll give a presentation, but long story short, with my research, I put these vibrotactors, these little vibrators in the skin of people. I disorient them, you know, with the hope that the vibrotactors will help people figure out where they are. And it turns out that people, while they can use the vibrotactors cognitively to correct themselves, it doesn't perceptually make them feel like they're at the right place. And I'm like, why? You know, like, how do I merge? How do I make human and machine one, so that these vibrotactors actually make a person feel like the correct location that they're at, and thereby cure disorientation, if you can cure something like that. So those are the questions. How do you train a person? That was my main thing. And again, if we don't even build a device for synesthesia, we build a device for sensory substitution, I think we can definitely take motivation from the training programs that some of these people have done here. Okay, so what did they find? They found that prolonged synesthetic association training, so this is just their training program to take people who don't have synesthesia and try to give them something that's similar to that experience, it actually results in synesthetic phenomenology. And what this word, again, just means is that people actually experience the phenomena of synesthesia. They didn't have synesthesia before, and they actually feel like they're actually experiencing it genuinely. And again, you know, Ethan's point's good too. Like, maybe they're lying. I mean, that could definitely be the thing. Right? I guess you have to go with a little bit of trust with what some people are saying. And then trained synesthetic phenomenology is associated with perceptual differences in visual areas. So they did do these brain scans, none of which I've read. So I don't know how rigorous it is, but they're reporting that you can actually find visual areas that are being activated. And trained synesthetic phenomenology is associated with behavioral synesthetic markers. Prolonged association training does not generally lead to similar cortical changes. So they also sort of contrasted. They said, okay, we're going to give a synesthesia type association, and then we'll also give a non-synesthesia association to see if there's a difference. And then they found that, yes, you know, the synesthetic association really was activating visual areas, whereas this was not. And so, you know, so that was sort of like what their finding was. And what I was interested in was like, what does a training program look like? How extensive is this? So this will be just fast because I didn't like super duper read it, but you know, what they were training was a bunch of letters, and they then associated these letters with colors, you know, so like R would be red, which kind of makes sense, but Q would be purple. And then this is what they're, and then they sort of have like a control group type stuff. And I'll just, you know, scroll to their training program just so you can kind of see. So just like the previous paper, and that was done by other authors in the last like sort of video that we did, they had an elaborate multi-week sort of training process. So again, this is something for us to think about. Like we're making a device, stuff like that. We want to have fun. But if we really want to feel something deep, I mean, this is going to be many weeks. We're going to go on a many-week journey. And I think their training period was like about maybe an hour long, maybe. I kind of forget. Okay. But either way, it's kind of extensive. The other sort of element to what they have here, similar to the previous one that did it, is that with each passing week, they're making it tougher and tougher. So like an n back task is like you have to remember like an n number of steps back what just happened, and so that's wicked difficult to do. So like they start off with just passive, you just look at it and you're sort of like are trying to absorb it, and then they sort of get more and more active components to it, and that was pretty much all I looked at. So this may motivate or inform part of our training program. So yeah, my presentation was not as thorough and as good as everyone else's, but this is from time to time, this is what happens. Okay, so brainstorming. We've got a solid, like, let's just add 5 minutes to it. So eight plus 5 minutes to brainstorm. And you guys can just unmute yourself and we will brainstorm. Any thoughts on how all this connects, on what we may build, anything like that?
I think the thing you mentioned about your previous training program, how you want to get the people to be able to orient themselves with specifically the tactile thing. To me, it feels like we probably then want to look at ways that we can kind of induce an experience that's very easy to almost like conscious, like suppress into the subconscious, so that eventually they're reacting to the device in a way that's like second to nature. So something that's just very easy to like internalize.
This is really good, and again, like a lot of like industry, when they're thinking about devices, like if you watch the story of the Mac or whatever, the whole idea was like, how do you create an intuitive design where a person can do things like, this thing with the finger and it grows, very easy to understand and you can connect to it. And with my research too, and this may connect a little bit to the old points of like, how do you build an association? Are little vibrations enough, or do you need pressure cues and things like that? And again, whatever we build doesn't have to be related to anything to my research. That's just what I've been thinking about on the side, but it is a really good point. Pick something that's intuitive and easy to sort of build a mapping to. Yeah.
I was actually thinking of something similar to that, and specifically like where you would place that device. Like you mentioned how in one study the device was placed on the tongue and the map was based on that. So I'm wondering if like the tongue would be like the most optimal place to really, induce those experiences versus like another location of the body that may be, more effective.
I mean, it's a really great point. A part of motor science looks at different coordinate systems for each of the body parts. And one of the ideas is that, you have an elbow coordinate system and you have a wrist coordinate system. And somewhere in your brain, all of these different coordinate systems, some very complex math is happening to sort of unify all of them together. And one idea that came up as we talked about that is that, can you exploit the inherent coordinate system of your elbow to map something that's very elbow-like? Is there an elbow-like thing? I haven't really thought about that, but it's a really cool kind of idea. Let's write that down.
Yeah, you mentioned the people sometimes sort of cognitively understand something and not, and I found that totally to be the case in my little experiment with myself. So I wonder how, you need to be able to learn something effectively, but you need to somehow cut out the cognitive things, and like what Punya was saying might help with the thing I'm doing, like, but you somehow have to like defeat the cognitive, the like learning through, I don't know, some sort of slower association, so that you can get to the association that's immediate.
Yeah, and what's really cool, again, in motor science is, for those of you that visited the lab, we have like a rotating room. And, for those of you that visited it, when you're in the rotating room and you try to reach, because you're in a rotating environment, there's a Coriolis force that acts in your arm. So if you're trying to reach straight, your arm actually deviates and goes off to the side. It's really surreal. It's really weird. And it takes multiple reaches before you're able to reach properly. Now, people have tried to replicate this using, robotic handle or whatever, but sort of like, just to touch on what Erika is saying, what they've said is they gave people cognitive strategies. They're like, look, your arm is going to deviate to the left. Okay, so in your first reach, already predict that and try to reach properly. And so the question is, like, does cognitive strategies and stuff like that help? And where does it hinder? And and so they do, in motor learning, they've found like there are two domains, and each of them do have to learn. They're two separate processes. One can help the other. If you're trying to learn how to ice skate, if you've got some good cognitive strategies, it may help you accelerate that motor pattern. But at a certain point, you sort of it has to leave just the cognitive domain and go into like the synergies or whatever, the muscle memory, as people call it. So it's kind of cool. Like, how do you tap both of these processes is a really good question. Yeah. And not even related to this at all, but I think part of my discussions with other people where I'm making artwork and talking about things like, I don't know, depression and trauma, because that's one of the big things I also like to explore. That's sort of also the question of like, how do you go into your subconscious and communicate and operate in that domain, and how do you operate in your conscious, and how do you connect these two worlds? So it's a slightly different topic, but one that I think connects somehow. And again, with the brainstorming, guys, even the more like the more far away from any of these we get, sometimes the better. Like, we're not trying to have just fully logical, like it could just be out there, different topics, stuff like that. And we just try to figure out how to connect it. So anyone have like a completely random thing that we try to connect to this?
I guess I have something random, although I don't know if it will connect, but I wonder, and this might have been brought up already, but I wonder in people with PTSD, like where that association would come in here, and if it's long-term enough to qualify as something other than just association.
I think it's a really great thing, and I think Gayatri was the one who had presented a little bit on that, and to bring it up again is a really pretty cool thing, because it also connects to sort of this topic right over here. Yeah, like, are there things that we could take from sort of de-associating PTSD events and apply them here? And are there things that we can take from synesthesia training or sensory substitution to sort of build associations away from the negative stuff to positive ones? I mean, we're really asking big questions here, which is like, how do you build associations in the human? How do you connect, two parts that you want? Like, I've got friends who do ketamine and like, mushrooms and stuff like that, because they want, that's another sort of random thing, but like, like, can we use like some of these drugs to get to the same place, and is that good or bad? I think these are like really deep sort of questions. Okay, more like, let's get even further away from, let's get some real some out there stuff. Yeah.
I just was thinking of one idea, like if someone, like in terms of a device that we could build, if someone was shown a color or told a number, or if someone like heard a note, those are, I guess, 3 input options, and then the output, I guess, was like a vibration on some part of the body. So like we set up vibratectors on, I don't know, like all the cardinal directions, like as a belt, and then maybe on the shoulders as well, and then on the knees, let's just say. And then I don't know, like maybe we can sort of be trained if more easily because it's tactile or something. I don't know, like if we hear a note, then maybe if it's like a lower note, then we might hear it in our knees if we're oriented like that. Or some people might think that, oh, my voice is low, so that's a head voice. So I think it's like a vibration coming from my, like, sort of, I don't know, training like that. I don't know. It's, yeah.
I think that's really cool, and again, like this sort of also comes to like body parts too, like or no, sorry, individual differences. Like if you think about it, some of what we want to do, like even if we have it sort of like as a really interesting experience, like almost like an art experience for different people, and they're like, okay, you got all these vibrations, where do you map these things? And then people map things differently, and then they're like, I don't know, it's a cool way to explore. And that kind of also reminds me, this is all within the topic of mapping, and we can probably connect PTSD to this device too. I remember when I was co-teaching this class on mindfulness. By the way, I'm doing a meditation thing, which I think I told you guys on Saturday. Everyone's welcome. And one of the guys was co-teaching this class, but it will be at this event. So anyways, I was talking to this therapist who had come, and she was sort of talking about that she does body scans, which is that you're sort of in this meditative state, and then you just like pay attention to your toes and your feet, and you sort of detense your legs or knees, whatever, and you scan your whole body like that. And what she told me was that with people who have PTSD, you have to be careful because different people will store that trauma in different parts of their body. Sometimes they won't even know it, and they're scanning the body, and all of a sudden, they begin to feel their trauma, sort of unwind. So you have to be really cautious when doing that. Is what she said in her practice. That's what she noticed. So again, like thinking about this device, like could we use color, sound, vibrations to map out where some of us store our trauma? I don't know. It's an interesting idea. So yeah.
I think one thing that kind of relates to all this is kind of like whatever we end up doing, one thing to think about is almost like the severity of the device that we do, right? So like, for example, if we're talking about like vibrations, do we want to just kind of like give you a little vibration, or do we want the thing to like feel like it's shaking your body, right? Like, what would that do for like, your conscious experience? Like, it'll probably be a lot harder to like sort of bury the feeling of like getting your whole body shook versus like a little prick on your hand or something, or like so that might relate to all the things here.
It's a really great point, and it does almost connect a little bit to the intuitive point too, because like it's sort of like what are each of these sensations really like communicating to us. Yeah, I mean like a hard vibration, a soft vibration, like I've attended this lecture where like because like the vibrations that my vibratactors give are not really that I don't know, biologically relevant perhaps, but like stroking, we have particular neurons that sort of respond just to stroking, I have learned. So like those are important stuff. Okay, we're at the 5-minute part. Any other final sort of things?
Sort of just bandwagoning off of that, but kind of going off what I read, if something like, the volume at which something is, like the stimulus is sort of administered, or like if someone is in a particular mood, if that could be like a confounding variable that ends up affecting the result. And something that I found interesting was that with people without synesthesia, some associations found, or like I guess confounding variables were, for example, Y was associated with yellow just because it started with a Y. So just ideas all over the place.
No, this is really good. Thank you. Yeah. All right. This is great. So I guess for next time, I don't know. This might be fun. Like and again, no stress. Don't do it if you don't want to. Everything's super chill. But maybe those of you that want to, I'll do it. Maybe we make like a fun little drawing or something of like, I don't know, like a cool device. And right now, don't limit yourself by like what we can do. Let's just let our imaginations go wild, and we just sort of make a cool device. It could be like a synesthesia training, it could be sensory substitution, it could be anything. And then we can sort of, those that want to can share it. and maybe that can be like springboard into discussion on like, what do we want to explore, and you know, eventually add science and stuff like that too. But first, the most important component is fun, I think. All right. Does that sound like a good next step, or what do you guys think? Any other?
Yeah, that sounds good.
All right, sweet. Because I think we definitely will build something, which is going to be wicked cool. So we're getting in that direction. We'll do a little soldering eventually in our future, and those of you that don't know how to do that, we'll teach you. And that's what we were doing back in the COVID days, our group. So it was good. All right, well, I'll talk to everybody next week.
And also, sorry, I would love to, it could be next week. I would be very intrigued to know, like, I'm in Texas, obviously, so I'd love to know how I can help with the building process any way that I can. Or if there's other aspects that I
We each build at our own homes. So you'll
Oh.
get like an Arduino a kit and like little sensors. It'd be like, I don't know, it's like $40 or something altogether. And then we just like, we'll Zoom, and then we're each just like soldering and building and helping each other out. So each of us will build like our device. We'll walk you through. We've done like simple devices before. So yeah.
Perfect. All right.
Cool.
Sounds good. Good to see everyone. Thanks, Vivek. See you next week. Okay.
Cool. Bye.